Who has made a headline for missing 6 of his 8 field goal attempts this year, is now back to just punting and kicking off. The former Saint Morton Anderson is here for most field goals. Look out! Right through! A kick block by Steve Gleason. It is scooped and scored by Curtis DeLoach. Touchdown, New Orleans!
Oh, didn't see you there. Welcome back. All right, y'all. Welcome back to our second day with Job, our 4th week online, and again, looking forward to discussing the problem of evil with you. We're going to solve it today. Again, not really. So hopefully you remember from yesterday that the idea of the book of Job is not to give a solid, definitive, clear, concise answer to the problem of evil, but rather it's to train your vision, your eyes of faith, to see the way that God sees. So today we're going to look at a few more of these ways of understanding Job. Probably look at just numbers 2 and 3, and then we'll do 4 and 5 on Wednesday. And then we'll kind of do a little bit of Easter prep on Wednesday as well. So let's get into it. Let's do this. All right. So if you remember the story, Job, all good guy, not all good, but he's a good guy, but then bad things start happening to him. And God is convinced, right, that Job will remain faithful even when these bad things happen. And Satan's like, no way, Jose. No way, God, I guess. But Job, the only reason that Job is faithful to you, God, is because he has these good things. You take away those good things, he's not going to be faithful. Yesterday we looked at, we'll just back up real quick. We looked at this form of argument, right? Like, let's look at the simple answer, the surface level answer, and then really think about it in light of the evidence of what we know in terms of our faith already, and then see if that pushes our vision along a little further. So yesterday we said, oh, well, the simple answer is that Job's not a good guy, right? If bad things only happen to bad people, then Job just must not be a good guy, must actually be a bad guy. But then we said, but God says he's a good guy, and God doesn't lie. So Job must be a good guy. Therefore, there must be a bigger reason. So we move on now to number 2. So, what if, though, our faith in God is wrong? Because I can already hear Peter, right, saying, like when I said that, but we know God doesn't lie, I could hear, or Peter, maybe, Jack, probably definitely saying something like, aha, Mr. Flores, but what if God lied? Right? Like, you could definitely hear that. Okay, so let's examine that. So number 2, you see this thing between faith, this conflict between faith and experience. Our faith teaches us that God never lies, right? Our faith teaches us that God is all good, that God is all loving, that God is truth itself. The Hebrew word here is emeth, is truth. God's whole identity in the Old Testament, if you think about it, through every experience, this whole identity is caught up in being faithful, right? The Israelites constantly break the covenants, but God remains faithful. That's who he is, right? What if he lied? And so what we want to look at is that if this is the formula, that Job's faith is that good person, good things happen, but Job's experience says that he's a good person and bad things happen. So either his faith is wrong or his experience is wrong, but he's experiencing suffering. So he thinks, well, my faith must be wrong, right? So the simple answer here is that God fails the test. He's not trustworthy. God, in fact, lies. God says that bad things would not happen to good people and that he would always be there for them. You can think of, you ever seen Lion King when Mufasa, I hope I'm not spoiling this for anybody, when Mufasa meets his, when Mufasa takes a fall, and then Simba asks many years later, you said you'd always be there for me, but you're not. Like, you lied, right? And at least that's what Simba thinks. Simba's experience is showing him that, Mufasa, his father, has been unfaithful to him. And the Israelites, specifically Job, though, in this moment, is feeling this same thing of, God, how could you have been untrustworthy to me? I thought that's who you were. Now, this one might be a little tough, and I can see, my mind's eye, I can see some of you not taking this this against the simple answer seriously, but let's think about it, right? God's not the one that's on trial here. right? And the whole setup, you know the setup of the story. The point isn't to test God. The point is to see if Job will remain faithful even without the good things. So God's not the one that needs to be tested. This is kind of like saying, I'm trying to think of it, the Saints game coming up tonight. So I checked my watch. I'm going to make sure I make it to the Saints game. The commute's pretty far. I just got to go to my couch. It's just beyond that wall right over there. But yeah, I mean, the Saints fans, oh man, we've had some tough ones, but it would be kind of like saying that, that's a tough analogy. I was going to try to do something with the no call from 2 years ago. And that's really not helpful. It brings back some bad memories too. So let's put it this way, okay? It might be hard for you to think of this, but from my perspective here, right now my daughter's having a hard time sleeping. Right? She was waking up 3 to 4 times in the middle of the night. We're not sleeping, and so what we're trying to teach her to fall asleep on her own. Now our room is next door to her room. But she doesn't know that, right? Like she kind of knows it, but she doesn't understand that we're right there. And so we put her down in the crib. She gets all upset. She starts crying and screaming. And she doesn't want us to leave. And we tell her good night. We tell her everything's gonna be fine, and we walk away, right? We say, "Mommy and Daddy love you. Everything's fine." And then we walk away, and she screams and freaks out and is terrified. And her experience kind of says, "Well, if they loved me, they wouldn't walk away like that. They wouldn't have abandoned me in my hour of need. Like I'm screaming over here. Why would they abandon me?" And on the very other side of the wall, we have a little baby monitor, and we can see her, right? And we're watching over her, and we're making sure that nothing bad will happen to her, right? If she were to try to escape her crib, right? Like put her leg over the railing, or there's a bookshelf nearby. If she would try to knock the bookshelf down, or if she start to bang her head or something, right? We would rush in. We know we're not going to let anything bad happen to her. And we know that. But her experience, she doesn't know that because she can't see from the outside in. Now apply that to Job here. Job's experience tells him that God is not being faithful. His faith tells him that he should be faithful. But you could say like the raising, or the story is about Job being raised into the fullness of the man that he can be. In the same way that the story with my daughter is that we're trying to train her into becoming an even fuller, even more human, right? Like you probably don't need your mom and dad to put you to bed at night because at some point they did this exact same thing. And what God is doing is God is allowing Job, let's get to this next note here, to pass the test, to grow into a more mature version of himself, right? That he no longer needs God's hand, just the good things, to praise God, but that God is allowing him to walk, or you say to stay faithful even in the midst of suffering. That's not quite what we're doing. We're just hoping she falls asleep. But if you start to see that in the story, but see it in your life even more importantly, that the times that you thought that God had abandoned you, he was actually probably with you even more closely than you probably would have even realized. You've heard the cheesy story about the footprints on the beach. I'm sure at some point your pastor has said this in a homily, but the story goes like, this guy, he was, in some stories he's passed away, but in other stories he had a dream or something, and they see 2 sets of footprints walking along the beach, and Jesus says, you see those footprints? I was always there walking with you, like throughout your life. And then the guy's like, well, what about during those times? Like, and you only see 1 set of footprints. Those are the hardest times of my life. Like, where were you then? There's only 1 footprint. I was by myself. And then Jesus responds, like, no, that was when I was carrying you. And it's supposed to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. So, less cheesy, here's St. Paul, 1 Corinthians. He does not let us be tested beyond what we can endure, right? That God is not going to give us a task that he doesn't think we can handle. So the faith guides your experience. When you start to see with the eyes of faith that God is not going to abandon you even in your suffering, right? Then you start to realize how God is in fact with you even in the midst of your suffering. Let's see, the crucifix. I don't think we have a crucifix in this room. We've got Holy Family icon up here, but we don't have a crucifix, I don't think, in this room, unless I've got a rosary. But you've seen a crucifix, right? That's what we mean. God is with us even in the midst of suffering. He's not going to give us something that we can't handle. And he took on that suffering for us. And that's maybe a little bit more tomorrow when we talk about Easter. Okay, so last one for today. I know we're going a little long here, so I'll just put it all up on the board, and we'll get going. So, well, what then, though, you could say, what about this life, this more mature life that I'm growing into? If growing up involves more and more suffering, I don't really think I want to play this game, this game of life here. What are you talking about? Job has these great statements, these challenges to God, and they get more intense as the story goes on. And he just starts throwing it out there, right? He says to God here, well, if this is the way that life's going to be, if I'm going to be suffering, and not only does Job suffer with the removal of all the good things he has, he starts getting boils and disfigurements, and it's not great, right? It gets bad. It's well, why do I even exist? Why would you bring me forth from the womb if this is how life's going to be? If you've ever seen the great movie It's a Wonderful Life, it comes on around Christmas time. Same plot, life would have been better if I had never been born. So the simple answer is, God just doesn't care about Job. He's expendable. There was a video game that I used to play, probably even back when I was at St. Catherine's. I still play it every now and then, called Roller Coaster Tycoon. In it, right, you control everything in your theme park, but one of the things you can do is you can pick up the little people in your theme park, and you can place them all over the map, and sometimes you can place them in the middle of the lake, and they'll say they're drowning, and then you pick them back up, or you can build a roller coaster that's really scary, and if they blow up, they blow up. Sounds pretty bad, but the idea being you're that all-powerful God, and I just don't really care about guest number 6,402, right? I just really don't care about that guest. That might be the way we kind of think of God with Job here. Maybe God doesn't really care about Job. If we just look at the facts of the story, God doesn't seem to care about Job. But again, we return back to what our faith teaches us, but that also what we do have evidence for, right? That God is an all-good, loving Father. And if that's the case, well, then how can we then re-see the story? And that's, I guess I jumped the gun here with my analogy. That's where the analogy of the loving Father comes in, is that oftentimes a parent will allow their child to suffer so that the child becomes, say more mature, or think of learning to ride a bike. I've noticed with the quarantine, a lot of kids are starting to ride their bikes, and there was this one little girl here that was learning to ride a bike with just with training wheels, right? But it's the first time she's ever been on a bicycle, and she thought it was the most exciting thing because she's going from a wagon or a tricycle to a real bicycle, and she said, can we do this all the time? And you see that excitement, but if you've ever taken the training wheels off, oftentimes you fall down a lot. And there's two options, right? You can say, well, if God really loved her, if the Father really loved his Son, he wouldn't let him fall down. But then if you don't let him fall down, he never learns to ride a bike. He either never rides a bike, or he rides it with training wheels into adulthood. And that'd be kind of sad and scary, maybe a little creepy. You got to fall down sometimes. You got to let, when my daughter was learning to walk, she has to fall down a lot to learn how to walk. Right now, she can't go down steps. She can go up steps, but not down steps. And the other day she fell. Her knees are pretty scraped up. Now we could put her in a little bouncy thing and never let her walk around. We could never take her outside, right? But then she would never become a fully formed, human being. So it's sometimes hard for us to understand God's ways. But the analogy here is not to say this is exactly how it is, but the analogy is to train your spiritual vision to consider what is it that God's doing in your life at that moment, right? In the same way that you would say, if you could consider what your Father would be doing in that moment. So, the Saints game that's coming on tonight in 2 minutes, so I got to hurry this up, is the first game back after Hurricane Katrina. And I know we said this yesterday, but with Katrina, it's so easy to say God doesn't care about our life, right? God doesn't care. But if we remember, okay, God is our all-good, loving Father. He does care. My faith teaches that he cares. So how can I begin to see what is happening in a way that might make sense in the light that God is my loving Father? And I mentioned this a little bit, I think it was last Friday. One of the deepest desires I always had was to have brothers and sisters. And my mom and dad had a really hard time even having me. My dad's one of 11, my mom was one of 4, and they wanted a big family, but whatever complications there were, they couldn't have a big family, so they only had me. And I didn't understand that as a kid. I always thought, like, I don't understand. Like, why can't we just go pick up a brother somewhere? And after Katrina, like, my house was flooded. I lost a lot of possessions. My mom and dad stayed in New Orleans. My mom was in med school at the time. My dad was working out at the Michoud Assembly Facility for NASA, so he went over there. My mom was in Baton Rouge or wherever trying to study for medical school, and so I went to Houston to live with a host family, and they had 10 sons naturally, 5 of whom were still there, and I got to live with them. They took in another guy from Jesuit, and they took in another family from Jesuit. And for the first time ever, I had brothers. And then when I moved back home to New Orleans, I still lived with my aunt and uncle. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and lived with them. I lived with my best friend Alex, and he was one of 3 brothers. So I had brothers again there. I lived with one of my other good friends, Anthony. He had a brother and a sister, and I lived with him for a little bit. And throughout all of that, I got to experience something of what it was like to have, siblings. And I'm not saying that was the exact way I had always imagined it, but those relationships and those experiences I wouldn't trade for anything, and they're still really near and dear to my heart. We still, my parents still get a Christmas card from the lady that took us in, Katrina. But you don't see that if you just focus on sometimes the negatives, right? You can say, when my house flooded, my possessions are gone, God abandoned me. But if you start to train your vision to say, at least first off, to say, maybe second, because maybe you will ask those questions no matter what, but then take a minute to break down and say, what is God trying to show me in this moment? Where's God trying to lead me in this experience? And you might be surprised at how quickly you realize that just like a father trying to help his child become, the best version that he could be, God is doing the same thing in your life, even in the midst of suffering, and He's not abandoned you in that suffering. Okay, so hope you'll have watched this game. I'm gonna go watch the Saints game now, and we will see you guys tomorrow, Wednesday, for the final lesson on Job, and then a little bit on Holy Week before we break for Easter. Okay, guys, don't forget to do the end questions, and I will see you in the next one.